Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Vishal from Maharaja Agarsen University, Badi, Himachal Pradesh. Today we are going to discuss about the module Multilateral Agreement on Trade in Goods and Services under the paper International Business Operations. Students, after completing this module, you will be able to understand the essence of WTO agreement, understand the concept of multilateral agreement on trade in goods and services, know about the journal agreement on trade in services, and understand about the journal agreement for tariffs and trade. International business in the form of exporting and importing goods and services takes place under a global system of rules and regulations agreed upon and enforced by national governments and international organizations. The emergence of trading blocs has increased the size of national markets by eliminating trade barriers among member countries. Some blocs such as European Union, NAFTA, APEC, etc. aim to integrate the member countries into an economic and political entity with common governance institutions as well as coordinated economic policies, including a single currency. The creation of a single large market with minimal restrictions on movement of goods and services has had a major effect on the international business operations of many firms around the globe. The module deals with various agreements on trading of goods and services which have bearing on the internationalization of goods and services. World Trade Organization WTO. International business is based on the theory of comparative advantage, which states that countries should specialize in manufacturing or growing those products in which it has comparative advantage. It will pay the country to produce more of those goods in which it is relatively more efficient and to export these in return of goods in which its absolute advantage is least. The principle of comparative advantage favors free trade for efficient production. However, to protect their domestic industry, countries resort to tariff and non-tariff barriers and restrictions. As such, to discipline international trade and encourage free flow of goods and services, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was agreed in 1947, subsequently replaced by WTO. WTO's agreement cover all the original treaty provisions of GATT relating to trade in goods and also cover new areas like trade in services, trade related intellectual property issues, and trade related investment measures. The WTO, which began its operations in 1995, is a successor of GATT. The GATT was a forum where the member countries met from time to time to discuss and solve world trade problems. The WTO differs from GATT in the sense that it is a chartered trade organization. The WTO has a legal status and enjoys privileges or immunities on the same footing as the IMF and the World Bank. 76 governments became members of the WTO on its first day. The membership of WTO increased to 127 by December 1996. India is one of the founder members of WTO. The WTO is based in Geneva, Switzerland, and its main functions are to limit harmful trade practices, acting as a forum for multilateral trade negotiations, cooperating with other international institutes involved in global policy making, overseeing national trade policies, to administer the understanding on rules and procedures governing the settlement of disputes, that is dispute settlement understanding, which is briefly called as DSO. Objectives of WTO. The basic objective of WTO is to ensure global free trade and reduction of tariff and non-tariff barriers. The ultimate objective of WTO is to expand production and trade and allow the optimal use of world resources. Its procedures are based on the principles of transparency, predictability, and certainty. WTO agreement. The WTO agreement cover goods, main agreement of GATT, for example, all industrial products, consumer durables, etc. Services, main agreement GATS, for example, banking, insurance, consultancy, etc. Intellectual property, TRIPS, for example, patents, copyrights, and trademarks, etc. The agreement establishing the WTO consists of the following, which embody the result of the Uruguay round of the multilateral trade negotiations. Multilateral Agreement on Trade in Goods. From 1947 to 94, GATT was the forum for negotiating lower custom duty rates and other trade barriers. The various agreements dealing with different aspects relating to trade in goods are: number 1, understanding on balance of payment provisions of GATT. The members imposing restrictions for correcting balance of payment deficits should give preference to price-based measures. The various price-based measures can be import surcharges, import deposits, or measures which affect the price of imported goods. Agreement on Agriculture. The Agreement on Agriculture seeks to open national markets to international competition by replacing non-tariff measures with normal custom duties. The agreement also seeks to check overproduction by progressively reducing government aids. Moreover, it seeks new disciplines on reduction in subsidies along with the volume of subsidized exports. The agreement on agriculture relates to the following. Number 1, domestic subsidies. Domestic subsidies fall into two categories, that is, non product specific subsidies given for all crops and product specific subsidies given for specific crops for the purpose of calculating total subsidies. Both types of subsidies mentioned above must be totaled. The total subsidies should not exceed 10% of the value of total agricultural production in that year. Export subsidies. WTO members are required to reduce the value of direct export subsidies to a level of 36% below the 1986 to 1990 base period level and their quantity by 21% over the same period. In developing countries, the reductions are two-thirds those of developed countries over a 10-year period, and there are no reductions for least developed countries. Sanitary and phytosanitary measures. These concern food safety and animal and plant health measures. The agreement lays down procedures and criteria for the assessment of risk and determination of appropriate levels of phytosanitary or sanitary protection. Agreement on textiles and clothing. The objective of this agreement is to secure the integration of the textiles and clothing sector into the GATT 1994. The integration would take place in four phases. In the first phase, each party from the specific list, which accounted for not less than 16% of its total volume of imports in 1990, would be integrated into the GATT products. In the second phase, products which accounted for not less than 17% of 1990 imports would be integrated. In the third phase, beginning 1st January 2002, products which accounted for not less than 18% would be integrated. All remaining products would be integrated at the end of 1st January 2005 in the fourth phase. Integration means the trade in tops and yams made up textile products, fabrics, and clothing will be governed by the rules of GATT. As a part of integration process, all member countries should take actions to improve market access and ensure the application of policies relating to fair and equitable trading conditions. Agreement on trade related aspects of investment measures, briefly called as TRIMS. TRIMS calls for the removal of all trade related investment measures within a period of 5 years. TRIMS requires foreign investment companies to be treated at par with national companies. The agreement recognizes that certain investment measures restrict and distort trade. Thus, it requires mandatory notification of all known conforming trims and their removal within 2 years for developed countries, 5 years for developing countries, and 7 years for least developed countries. The WTO has established a committee on trims which will monitor the implementation of these commitments and report to the Council of Trade in Goods annually. The multinational agreement on trade in goods has strengthened various rules and disciplines. The most important of these relate to anti-dumping, subsidies, and countervailing measures, safeguards, and dispute settlement. Rules concerning dispute settlement have been made time-bound, automative, and judicial in approach. Journal Agreement on Trade in Services GATS. The Journal Agreement on Trade in Services is the first multilateral agreement to provide legally enforceable rights to trade in all services. It has built-in commitment to continuous liberalization through periodic negotiations. And it is the world's first multilateral agreement on investment since it covers not just cross-border trade but every possible means of supplying a service, including the right to set up a commercial presence in the export market. The GATS has three basic principles. First, it covers all services except those provided in the exercise of governmental authority. Second, there should be no discrimination in favor of national providers, the national treatment principle. And the third should be no discrimination between the other member of the agreement, the most favored nation principle. So these are very powerful principles. No tariff or other generalized protection mechanism is applied in services, but the agreement does provide for important exceptions. First, governments can choose the services in which they made market access and national treatment commitments. Second, they can limit the degree of market access they provide. And third, they can take exceptions even from the MFN obligation in principle only for 10 years in order to give more favorable treatment to some countries than to WTO members in general. Agreement on trade related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS. The TRIPS agreement covers seven categories of intellectual property. They are: number one, copyright and related rights. The rights of authors of literary and artistic work such as books and other writings, musical compositions, paintings, sculpture, computer programs, and films are protected by copyright for a minimum period of 50 years after the death of the author. Also, protected through copyright and related, sometimes referred to as neighboring, rights are the rights of performers, producers, phonographs, and broadcasting organizations. The main social purpose of protection of copyright and related rights is to encourage and reward creative work. Trademarks: any sign or combination of signs capable of distinguishing the goods or services of one undertaking from those of other undertakings constitute a trademark. The owner of a registered trademark has the executive right to prevent third parties from using identical or similar signs for goods or services. The protection of trademarks stimulates and ensure fair competition. The protection may last indefinitely provided the sign in question continues to be distinctive. Geographical indications. This refers to the identity of a good originating in the territory of a member, region, locality where a given quality or reputation is essentially attributed to its geographical origin. Members are required to provide the legal means for interested parties to prevent the use of any indication which misleads the consumer as to the origin of goods. Industrial designs. Industrial designs are protected for a period of 10 years. The social purpose is to provide protection for the results of investment in the development of new technology, thus giving the incentive and means to finance research and development activities. Patents. Patents are given for inventions, whether products or processes, in all fields of technology. The invention should be new and capable of industrial application. The patent owners can transfer the patent rights to conclude licensing contracts. The protection for patents is given for a period of 20 years. Integrated circuits. The agreement provides protection to layout designs, topographics of integrated circuits for a period of 10 years. The protection shall lapse 15 years after creation of the layout design. Trade secrets. Trade secrets having commercial value shall be protected against breach of confidence. The test data submitted to the government in order to obtain marketing approval for pharmaceutical and agricultural chemicals shall be protected against unfair commercial use. Thus, it can be noted that the intellectual property rights are the rights given to persons over the creations of their minds. They give the creator an exclusive right over the use of his or her creation for a certain period of time. Dispute settlement system. The WTO's procedure for resolving trade quarrels under the dispute settlement understanding is vital for enforcing the rules and therefore for ensuring that trade flows smoothly. Countries bring disputes to the WTO if they think their rights under the agreements are being re-infringed. Judgments by specially appointed independent experts are based on interpretations of the agreements and individual countries' commitments. The system encourages countries to settle their differences through consultation. Failing that, they can follow a carefully mapped out stage by stage procedure that includes the possibility of a ruling by a panel of experts and the chance to appeal the ruling on legal grounds. The confidence in the system is borne out by the number of cases brought to the WTO. 167 cases by March 1999 compared to some 300 disputes dealt with during the entire life of GATT from 1947 to 1994. Plurilateral trade agreements. The plurilateral trade agreement consists of the following: agreement on trade in civil aircraft, agreement on government procurement, international dairy agreement, international bovine meat agreement. The first agreement was done at Geneva in April 1979. It was subsequently modified, amended, and rectified. The later three agreements were done at Marrakesh on 15th April 94. The WTO is a watchdog of international trade. It regularly examines the trade regimes of individual members. The WTO is also a management consultant for world trade. Its economists keep a close watch on the pulse of the global economy. It is a system that promotes fair and undistorted competition. The rules on non discrimination are designed to secure fair condition of trade. WTO encourages development and economic reforms as three-quarters of its members are developing countries and countries in the process of economic reform. Thus, it can be said that WTO has helped in creating a strong and prosperous trading system contributing to unprecedented growth. General Agreement for Tariffs and Trade. GATT. GATT was a multilateral treaty that came into force in January 1948. Its basic aim was to lay down rules for conducting international trade. GATT also provided a forum in which countries could discuss their trade problems and enhance their international trade opportunities. Trade negotiations under the GATT. Eight major trade negotiations took place under the GATT auspices. They are: the first round in 1947. The round saw the creation of GATT. The second round in 1949. The principal emphasis of this round was tariff reduction. The third round in 1951. The tariff reduction negotiations were continued in this round. The fourth round in 1956. The fifth round in 1960 to 61. The sixth round in 1964 to 67. The seventh round in 1973 to 79. And finally, the light round in 86 to 94, called as Urgei round. The fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh rounds involved revision of GATT rules and the addition of more countries. The talks of the Urgei round were the most ambitious and complex so far. The negotiations covered new areas such as trade related intellectual property rights, trade related investment measures, and trade in services and agriculture. The estimates made by the World Bank, OECD, and GATT Secretariat show that the income effects of the implementation of the Urgei round package will add between 213 and 274 billion US dollar annually to the world income. The largest resources will be in the areas of clothing, agriculture, forestry, and fishery products, and processed foods and beverages. The important aspects of market access in the Urgei round relate to the following: tariffs. The industrial tariffs were reduced and bound at very low levels at an average of 5%. The developing countries have also been reducing their tariffs. The tariffs reduction were to be carried out in six equated annual installments from March 1st, 1995. Textiles and clothing. A major achievement in their area has been the commitment to integrate this sector into a multilateral framework. The 10-year transition period in the textile agreement will enable countries to devise policies and allow strategic reaction on the part of the industry in order to reap the greatest benefits from the integration. Agriculture. On agricultural tariffs, developing countries have the flexibility of indicating maximum ceiling bindings. India had indicated ceiling bindings of 100% on primary products, 150% on processed products, and 300% on edible oils. The final act classifies that the operation in the public distribution system will not be affected by the provisions of the agreement. The Urgei round had also strengthened multilateral rules and disciplines. The most important of these relate to anti dumping, subsidies, and countervailing measures, safeguards, and dispute settlement. The agreement on trade related investment measures prohibits investment measures that are inconsistent with the national treatment. The developing countries have been given 5 years and the developed countries are given 2 years to phase out inconsistent terms. The Agreement on Trade-related Intellectual Property Rights provide norms and standards for number 1, copyright and related rights; number 2, patents; number 3, trade secrets; number 4, trademarks; number 5, industrial design; number 6, layout designs of integrated circuits; number 7, protection of undisclosed information. The agreement allowed 1 year for developed countries, 5 years for developing countries, and 11 years for least developed countries to change their laws for implementation of TRIPS. The General Agreement on Services is a set of multilaterally agreed and legally enforceable rules and disciplines relating to international trade in services. Services include financial services of persons and telecommunications. The GATS requires non-discrimination by governments on the basis of most favored nation clause and transparency in the form of publication of laws and regulations relating to services trade. Given its provisional nature and limited field of action, the success of GATT in promoting and securing the liberalization of much of world trade over 47 years is incontestable. The rush of new members during the Uruguay round demonstrated that the multilateral trading system was recognized as an anchor for development and an instrument of economic and trade reform. A whole corpus of jurisprudence on trade matters evolved under ages of GATT. The WTO is in a large measure built upon the strong foundation provided by the GATT. So students, let's summarize what we have learned in this module. We have learned about the essence of WTO agreement, the concept of multilateral agreement in goods and services, the General Agreement on Trade in Services, and the General Agreement for Tariffs and Trade. To discipline international trade and encourage free flow of goods and services, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was agreed in 1947, subsequently replaced by WTO. GATT was a multilateral treaty which was established to lay down rules for conducting international trade. GATT also provide a forum in which countries could discuss their trade problems and enhance their international trading opportunities. WTO's agreement cover all the original treaty provisions of GATT relating to goods and also cover new areas like trade in services, trade related intellectual property issues, and trade related investment measures. On the other hand, the General Agreement on Trade in Services is the first multilateral agreement to provide legally enforceable rights to trade in all services. It is the world's first multilateral agreement on investment, since it covers not just cross-border trade but every possible means of supplying a service, including the right to set up a commercial presence in the export market. Thank you very much.